Well, I'm happy to welcome back onto the show Rav Aurora. He is the co-founder of the Illusion of Consensus, independent journalist. Rav, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kim. It's always a delight to be on your show and to get to talk to you. So happy to be here.
You've recently wanted to have you back on because recently a piece that you wrote that just came out about a new FDA study. We know about the side effects. We've talked about the side effects about myocarditis, pericarditis for young men in the vaccines. That came out, unfortunately, for many people way too late. They'd already vaccinated their teenage sons. Many of them had already developed myocarditis, and that was just absolutely shameful. Now there's a new study that has come out showing a new risk, that is a new safety signal that has come out in even younger kids. Tell us about what this is.
Yeah, so the FDA did a cohort study. It was a FDA supported group of scientists, and they did a cohort study with about 4 million vaccinated kids. And they ranged from two to 4 years, 2 to 5 years, and then 12 to 17 years. And they've basically confirmed the existing fact that we already knew, that the vaccines were causing myocarditis and pericarditis in young adolescents. So that was unsurprisingly confirmed. But the shocking finding was that they found a new signal for elevated risk of seizures in kids 2 to 4 and 2 to 5, depending on Moderna, Pfizer. But basically, 2 to 5 years, they found an elevated risk at about 1 in 5,000, and they found it concentrated in dose one and dose two. It's unclear which one would have more side effects, but they found the 1 in 5,000 risk, and this has not been covered at all anywhere else. It hasn't been identified by other studies. So if this is true, if this is actually replicable in other studies, then this is an incredibly alarming finding, and but particularly when you have the FDA, an FDA supported group of scientists actually coming out with a study like this and admitting this, because we know the incentives that they have to publish certain kinds of research and obscure other kinds. So for them to do it is even more significant than for some other independent group to do it on their own.
So they're saying that the study showed that 1 in 5,000 would end up having seizures?
So the 1 in 5,000. So Jay and I, we were calculating the numbers. It's they didn't provide that exact rate, so we had to kind of like figure out like what the exact, like we had to figure out the denominator, which was not, you can't really find that. We actually don't have good data on that. Jay told
Mhm.
me, like, for finding
Jay
out, like,
Bhattacharya,
yeah,
just
yeah,
to be
yeah,
clear. He's your
yeah,
your co-founder of Illusion of Consensus.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's actually not good CDC data on like the exact number of like adverse events, and how many 5-year-olds took Moderna versus Pfizer. So we had to kind of estimate a little bit, and it's something like 1 in 5,000, within that range, and that number is truly alarming. Like, that means that hundreds, thousands, potentially tens of thousands of kids
Yeah.
would have gotten seizures. And especially, this is deeply concerning because there was no conceivable benefit for kids getting the COVID vaccines. Like, it's not that like kids who got it were 30% better off or at 40% greater chance of living against this incredibly deadly virus. So, because that's how you do medicine, right? Is that
Right.
you look at the benefits, you compare it to the costs, you see, does it make sense to get the surgery or not. In this case, you had basically nothing on the side of benefit. Very, very unlikely that it had significant benefit. And I remember Marty McCary from Johns Hopkins. He's talked about this, about how even with cardiac symptoms, a 2-year-old kid is not going to be able to say, I think I have myocarditis, or I'm having these intense chest pains. They're just going to cry, and you won't know what to do about it.
Right.
So it never made sense to give it to kids from the start, given their infection fatality rate was just 0.00000001%, and the kids that did die, because that's how it works, right? People want to spotlight individual cases. Well, oh, I know someone who knew someone who knew someone who, their 4-year-old got really sick with COVID. It's like, maybe, but like they probably had a lot of comorbidities and underlying health conditions. It was a very rare phenomenon. I mean, at least I didn't hear about basically anyone under the age of like 20, 25, 30 who got seriously sick with COVID. it definitely happened, but that was concentrated always in people with underlying health conditions like obesity, diabetes, coronary artery disease, etc. It was never in healthy people. And so for the FDA to not only like they recommended everyone get it, but they didn't even say that, oh, okay, kids who are healthy, they don't need it. They just did these blanket recommendations for
Right.
everyone. And when we can talk about my correspondence with the FDA, because that similar sentiments were expressed there.
Yeah, I wanna get into that when you were
Yeah.
researching this, but I was just calculating this out. I was wondering how many kids in the United States are in that age group. It's about 22 million, it looks like, that are well, from 0 to 5 years old. As of 2022, the statistics is about 22.4 million kids in that range. So, then you're looking at, let's say we half that. If we're gonna 2 to 5, we'll say like 15 million kids in that age group here in the United States. That's just in the
Hmm.
United States. That's not counting the world. The world would be,
Uh-huh.
this vaccine was pumped out where Canada, you're a
Yep.
Canadian, right? So then if you take that 11 million, what do we know what the percentage of kids, how many people vaccinated their kids that young? I would hope that parents were smart enough not to do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, I think the way the data is organized is that it's by certain age cohorts. So for this particular study, they found the elevated risk in 2 to 4 and 2 to 5 year olds.
Yeah,
I don't think we have good data on that, but I'm sure
on
you
how
could
many
find it for,
kids.
yeah, like
Well, it's
exactly in that age group.
what I'm seeing is that under 18, it was 50%, vaccinated their kids under the age of 18. I think, though, that majority of those were teen. I don't know if that many parents signed up, because there was all of those news stories where they're like, parents are just clamoring for this vaccine for their infant children, and then when they finally released it, nobody showed up. They were showing the images at the New York clinics when nobody was in line, nobody was showing up, parents were not trickling in, even though they were telling us for weeks that parents were months, they were telling us parents are clamoring for this, and then they just didn't show up. So I'm glad that so many did not. It is terrible for those that did, when it turns out their kids were not at risk of any real adverse side effects from COVID, the actual illness, but then you drove them and signed them up to get the injection yourself. It's one thing if your kid gets a virus and then they end up with some side effect from a virus. It's another thing when you drove them to go and get this thing that ended up causing them some serious problem. I mean, the guilt that so many parents
Yeah.
would have. And what's important about this, I think, is that, a lot of parents now are aware, more aware. They tried to cover it up for a long time in the beginning, of the myocarditis risk when it comes to vaccines. We need to know all the risks. There are so many more other things that parents are seeing in their kids that they're wondering if the vaccine caused it, but because it's not making the news, they're not sure. And now
Yeah.
seizures, if your kid had a seizure, if your toddler has had a seizure, you vaccinated them with COVID-19, you may be able to look at this and say, "Oh my gosh, wow, did this cause my kid now to have these seizures?" And then if that's the case, then you could start seeking out, it's easy to start wallowing and feeling guilty and getting mad, but then you can also start seeking out maybe where you could actually get treatment for that specific injury, rather than just, trying to like figure, "Oh, I don't know, they just ended up with epilepsy. They're born," whatever the doctor's trying to tell you causing the seizures. So I think it's really important that we, and it's really great that you guys are doing this work where
Yeah.
you're continuing to go down this path, because so many of us have moved on to other things.
Yeah.
Um, and you and Jay are still like harping on these vaccine issues, because this is now we find out about seizures. And what else do we not know about? You know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've just found the CDC data here. CDC COVID-19 vaccination coverage and demographic characteristics of infants and children aged 6 months to 4 years, and this shows that for getting one vaccine dose, kids aged 6 months to 4 years, the uptake rate was 10.1%, and
Okay.
5% for kids who had completed the full 2 doses.
Well, thank God. I thought that they
So
weren't even
yeah,
giving it 2 doses to the kids. I thought it was just 1 dose. I thought that, or did they then go and modify it and say, "Okay, it's like a lightened dose, but 2 of them," or I'm not really sure
yeah,
how
yeah.
they.
I don't remember the exact timeline, but
Yeah, for the
it
kids.
yeah. Again, they should have never recommended these shots. I mean, for kids, period. But honestly, for like if I were to do it, I mean, you could talk about like is this needed at all in certain age groups? But
Right.
at the very least, if you really want to get this out to some people, it should be like 65 and over. And if you have serious life threatening comorbidities, and even then, it's actually complicated because there's a certain cohort of people who are too sick, they're already way too immunocompromised to even get the vaccine. So that's another
Yeah.
cohort of people that we have to disambiguate. But people with serious comorbidities and being elderly, I think that would have been far better than what we got, which is everyone should be getting this thing.
Everybody, yeah, which is just outrageous. So tell us about your correspondence. So when you were doing this research and you guys
Yeah,
so you and Jay looked over this study that they put out in JAMA that the
yeah,
FDA put out, less than a month ago, right?
yep.
Then you contacted the FDA. What did you ask them?
Yeah, I just started off by asking them like, can you please further explain this signal, like what's going on here, and why the FDA is continuing to recommend this. And I was interested in getting some real answers as to what's like why they're still doing this, and why they're still recommending kids get vaccinated despite you know uh, finding more and more alarming things like this.
Right.
And their first response was the focus of this manuscript was the safety of the mRNA vaccines in U.S. children aged 6 months to 17 years. So we focused on the fact that the vaccine was safe. Um, I don't know about you, but that sentence actually doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
That doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make sense at all.
I think the analogy I
Like,
used in
well, we
yeah,
just decided to ignore the side effects because we just wanted to focus on the safetiness. It's safe.
the
I mean,
the analogy I used in the article was like this is like saying like the focus of our work was to clean the house, so we focused on the fact that the house was clean. That's that's basically what that sentence
we
reads.
we didn't look at
They
all the unclean parts. We didn't care.
yeah,
We just said, "Oh, it's clean. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Don't worry about it.
they they
Looks clean
li
to me."
they literally say in the first half of the sentence, the focus of this study was the safety of the vaccines, but so we focused on the fact that this vaccine was safe. But it's like if the focus was the safety of the vaccine, then that means you would look at the safety of the vaccine, not abide
Right.
by this like predetermined like religious dogma about whether this is safe or not.
Isn't that
Um,
amazing, the brain
yeah,
rot? Just the showcasing of brain rot right there, of just, or brainwashing. I don't know what we can call this. Just, some people said mass formation psychosis, like whatever you wanna call it. There's something wrong in
yeah,
the brain that is just allowing a person to just mindlessly formulate sentences like this, spit them out, and be like, "Well, we just" basically what they're saying is, "We determined the vaccine was safe, so we just determined the vaccine was safe."
yeah,
Without
yeah, exactly.
once the data was out. We didn't
Yeah,
wanna look at the side effects.
yeah. I mean, it's not hard to imagine what's going on in that person's head. I mean, they're likely just they're following the agenda. Like they have a job, right? And their kids' tuition and their house and their vacations all dependent on the FDA salary that they're getting.
Ugh,
So there's no way this FDA spokesperson that I communicated with are gonna say, "Oh, you actually have a point here. Yeah, you're right. We should revise our our recommendations.
right.
We should do that."
And that's kind of understandable. I mean, it's understandable that this person would feel that way. This is where it gets, like, tricky, right? And then it's the question of how do we ever get anywhere? How do we ever get real answers? How do we ever make
Yeah,
progress when I think it's understandable that a person wants to keep their job. I think it's understandable that a
yeah,
person wants to continue making money so they can support their homes, they can support their kids, they can put food on the table. That's understandable. That is why so many millions of Americans felt obligated to take the vaccine because they wanted to keep their jobs. And they had
yeah,
that same feeling. I have to comply because I can't risk my job. So I have to do this. So I mean it's understandable, but then it's the how do we break free from that? And that is just the I think the only answer is we have to hold the people at the very top totally and completely accountable.
yeah.
They have to lose their job.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
so then they need to create a culture within their organization of we just have to be honest and we have to whatever the data shows is what the data shows and then we just have to deal with that when we see it
yeah.
rather than creating this culture of cover up. Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show which you could catch Just by heading to that link down below, KimIversonShow.com, you can watch the full show from what you just watched, or you can catch the full show live Monday through Friday, live streams, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you then. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Never miss an episode, never miss a clip, never miss a segment. Thanks, guys.